have an active shooter. We have an active shooter.
Let's go ahead and declare this a mass casualty.
Welcome to Active Shooter, a podcast that covers the whys, the hows, and the aftermath of active shooter and mass casualty events.
They have an active shooter in the building. A second call says they are being attacked.
I've been shot. 16910 means we got shots fired. 4:15 at Route 291. Sounded like an automatic firearm.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
mass casualty incidents.
Thank you for listening.
You are listening to Active Shooter, a podcast that may contain adult themes, explicit language, and graphic depictions of violence. Portions of this show may be traumatic for those under 18. Listener discretion is advised.
And now to a deadly mass shooting in Orange, California. Police tonight are zeroing in on a motive after a gunman killed 4 people, including a 9-year-old. CBS's Omar Villafranca reports tonight from the scene of the massacre.
This is the man police say shot and killed a 9-year-old boy and 3 adults in a shooting rampage just 5 miles from Disneyland.
We have shots fired.
Detectives say 44-year-old started shooting, targeting people he knew. Trying to slow down first responders from saving the victims, he chained the gates to the business with bicycle locks. Police and SWAT team rushing to the scene, breaking through the locks.
According to Britannica.com, the FBI's definition of an active shooter is, quote, one or more individuals actively engaging in killing or attempting to kill people in a populated area. Implicit in this definition is the shooter's use of a firearm. And their definition of a mass killing is, quote, 3 or more killings in a single incident. Today's case falls within this technical definition as 4 innocent people lost their lives when they were senselessly murdered in the early evening hours of a regular Wednesday workday. It was a time when they should have been heading home to their families or other loved ones. The FBI's definition of mass shootings is the one that active shooter relies upon when selecting cases to cover. However, it can't be overlooked that according to the Wikipedia list of shootings, we've experienced nearly 2 per day in 2023 alone. Such differences in reporting are commonplace. It's easy to find statistics that can be spun to support a particular group's own narrative or agenda, but the fact remains, whatever definition you use, we need the increasing gun violence to end.
Active Shooter, the podcast, is a High Five Holly production, and I'm your host, JT. If you've listened to our prior episodes, you know that the Active Shooter podcast team has taken the No Notoriety Pledge, and we will not be sharing the real name of the shooters that we cover. We will be giving the shooters a pseudonym, and refer to them by that name throughout the episode. This will help in clearing up any confusion in the story, while remaining true to our pledge in not naming the shooter by their actual name.
We will refer to today's shooter as Brad. Wednesday, March 31st, 2021 was a breezy, warm day in the Southern California city of Orange. The town sits approximately 30 miles southeast of Los Angeles and is less than 6 miles from Disneyland. In comparison to the much larger cities surrounding it, Orange has a modest population of about 139,000 residents, and by all appearances, much like any typical smaller town, it's considered a very safe place to live, with the crime rate being 35% lower than most American cities. The Unified Homes office complex, situated at 202 West Lincoln Avenue, was a 2-story brown and beige building surrounded by residential neighborhoods filled with unassuming homes and apartment buildings. In addition to Unified Homes, there were a number of businesses located within the mid-size complex, including an insurance office, a legal services business, a phone repair shop, and a financial consulting firm, 2 of the office suites belonged to Unified Homes, which is a real estate business, specializing in mobile or manufactured home sales. The various companies carried on their normal operations, assiduously grinding through the day like most 9-to-5ers. 44-year-old Brad approached the building at what would have been close to or at the end of the regular workday. He carried a Glock pistol with him in the rental car, which he used to drive from his rental unit at the Lemon Tree Hotel and Suites in Anaheim, California, to the Unified Homes building complex. Brad was wearing the stereotypical shooter uniform of all dark clothing including black pants, a dark gray shirt and gray coat, black shoes, a black beanie cap, a black bandana that covered the lower half of his face, sunglasses, and he carried a backpack. The moment Brad arrived at the building, he immediately commenced shooting, firing at a woman who stood in an upstairs outdoor landing. Despite the ever-increasing gun violence and mass shootings taking place all around us, most people, understandably so, aren't prepared for the sound of gunfire to pierce the otherwise ordinary bubble where we all tend to exist. As we've reported dozens of times, many bystanders believed the gun blasts they heard was a vehicle backfiring, or some other noise that the mind tricks one into believing before fight, flight, or freeze kicks in. After the initial moments of panic and uncertainty subsided, witnesses and bystanders jumped into action, running for their lives, helping others seek shelter, and in many instances, calling 911 to report the active shooter. The Orange Police Department received the first call, indicating shots fired at 5:34 p.m., and the response was expeditious, with the responding police officers arriving only 2 minutes later. When the first officers arrived, they could hear shooting inside the building, so they attempted to enter the courtyard of the building, working towards establishing an entry point. Unfortunately, the wrought iron gates encircling the complex were locked tightly with a cable type of lock, almost like a bicycle lock, but thicker. It appeared that the shooter may be familiar with the building, knowing that by locking the front gate, he had effectively trapped his prey into what probably now felt like a very small cage.
It appears the suspect used a bicycle-type cable lock.
Before long, a sergeant with the police department arrived with the proper bolt cutters, allowing entry into the courtyard. Before police could even get inside, however, Brad immediately began firing at them. Officers shot back from outside the gates, and quickly a shootout ensued. 2 police officers were shooting at Brad, who wasn't even slightly hesitant about firing back. Brad had managed to scale both floors in the few minutes between his arrival and the police. A witness later reported hearing 3 shots, a pause, 3 more shots, another pause, then 4 more shots before finally they heard a man's voice saying, quote, "Don't move or I will shoot you," at least 3 different times. It is believed that those statements were actually commands from the SWAT team to the shooter.
All of a sudden I heard about 5 to 7 gunshots go off, and then waited a couple minutes, and then the police came, and then I heard a few more gunshots go off, and then there was like a lot quickly.
Another witness from a nearby auto repair shop reported that they heard 10 shots before police evacuated the shop just before exchanging gunfire with the shooter. The shooter was struck by at least one of the police bullets and was downed, severely injured, but not dead. Police advanced beyond the gate where they located Brad just inside the courtyard. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. It was initially unclear whether Brad was hit by police or a self-inflicted gunshot wound. A 9-year-old boy, Matthew, who was the son of an employee at Unified Homes, was shot and killed in the courtyard. The boy passed away wrapped in his weeping mother's arms. His mother, Blanca Tomeo, was injured, but would ultimately survive the physical injuries of that day. She will never be able to recover from the loss of her beautiful son, who died having caused no harm to a single soul in his short life. Matthew would normally have even been at the office building, but he didn't go to his usual after-school daycare and happened to be with his mother that day, a shattering fact that probably has made her recovery so much more painful.
All of a sudden I heard about 5 to 7 gunshots go off, and then waited a couple minutes, and then the police came, and then I heard a few more gunshots go off, and then there was like a lot quickly.
An adult female shooting victim was located upstairs on an outdoor landing, and an adult male was discovered inside of the office suites, while the third adult shooting victim was found inside a different office. The backpack Brad carried was later recovered at the scene, along with a semi-automatic handgun. Inside the bag was ammunition, handcuffs, and pepper spray. The shooting was one of the quickest we've ever covered, yet the damage is no less devastating. Brad's rental car was located in the parking lot of the office complex, though it doesn't appear that any additional contraband was found. The overall police response was immediate and included 20 law enforcement officers from the Orange Police Department and 30 investigators, along with agents from the ATF and FBI. It appears that there was a link between Brad and this particular business, including both personal and business relationships with a few of the victims. While the definitive motive has not been released, it is known that Brad's ex-wife worked for Unified Homes previously. When Brad arrived at the hospital, he was unconscious and unable to communicate verbally. He'd been shot in the head, and his outlook for recovery was uncertain at best. Despite his severe injuries, Brad would eventually survive and go on to be charged for his many revolting murders. "50-year-old Luis Tovar is described as the heartbeat or backbone of his family. A graduate of Anaheim High School, Luis had been voted prom king his senior year and was a boisterous, outgoing young man who was studious and driven. Luis married his soulmate, Carla Reynoso Tovar, and together the couple had 5 children and 6 grandchildren, whom they were very involved with and loved more than anything. Luis's daughter, Genevieve, who was also murdered, worked for the family business, and they all genuinely loved spending time together. Luis was a dedicated parent to his kids and grandkids, and even coached all 3 of his daughter's soccer teams when they were younger. There were many families and loved ones directly impacted by this shooting, and particularly Luis's immediate and extended families. They have much to mourn, and their loss will be felt every single day by each of their loved ones. 28-year-old Genevieve Regoza was born in 1993 and was the daughter of Luis Tovar, the owner of Unified Homes. Genevieve's husband, Armando, also worked for Unified Homes as a construction manager, while Genevieve was a transaction manager. The couple met in calculus class at Fullerton College, and they had been married for 6 incredible years. They would have been celebrating their 7th wedding anniversary that June. Those who knew Genevieve say she was unpretentious and full of joy, choosing to appreciate the little things in life over the things out of her control. A lover of all things Target, she could spend hours perusing her favorite store, searching for little treasures. An honest woman who believed good existed in everyone, her compassionate nature will be deeply missed by all who knew her. Genevieve's husband and 2 sons, an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old, were her entire world, and for them, moving on without her is earth-shattering. Leticia Solis Guzman was born in January of 1963 and was only 58 years old when she was murdered. After the killing, Leticia's family released a statement saying how wrecked they were by her incomprehensible murder and requested their privacy. As such, there is devastatingly little information known about Leticia other than she was a sales executive for Unified Homes for many years. And according to her Facebook bio, she was, quote, a Leo, a warrior, cool, cheerful, I love dancing, I love my family and happiness. The loss of such an esteemed, giving person is a genuine tragedy, especially for her family and loved ones. 9-year-old Matthew Farias was a happy and affectionate boy who loved to ride his bike and play soccer. A third grader at Hoover Elementary School, Matthew felt happiest helping people and went out of his way to make others smile. Such a light is extraordinary for a young person, but Matthew was just that. His aspirations to help others extended to his future goals, and he planned to be an astronaut or a police officer one day. He loved playing with his dog, a boxer named Ruby, and like many kids these days, he loved playing video games on his Xbox. An only child, Matthew still had a large extended family, and indeed, Genevieve was his half-sister. So this very extended family suffered a loss so great, it cannot be adequately described by mere words. Matthew was an active boy and loved playing outdoors, especially the game tag, which is pure and wholesome. It's so pure and wholesome that it shatters your heart all over again to think of all that was stolen from this boy and his family. Brad was born on December 6, 1977, in Fullerton, California. Research produced very little information about Brad, beyond some of his criminal history and his ties to the unified home business. At the time of the shooting, Brad was living at a motel in Anaheim. Whether he meticulously planned this shooting or quite literally woke up one morning and decided to go on a rampage, we may never know. At least, not until or unless the details of such are brought out in court. Otherwise, we don't know any reason or motive besides his ex-wife working for Unified Homes in January of 2011, and according to her, the company treated her like family for over 10 years. She could think of nothing but good things to say about her time there, and it was inexplicable why Brad would choose them as a target. In 2015, Brad was charged with misdemeanor counts of child abuse and endangerment, dissuading a witness from reporting a crime, battery, and assault with a deadly weapon other than a firearm. In that incident, the weapon was an umbrella. Brad pled guilty to misdemeanor battery, and it was because of this conviction he was legally prohibited from owning or possessing a firearm for at least 10 years after being convicted of a crime. Unfortunately, because of what was most likely some sort of oversight or clerical error, police learned 2 weeks after the shooting that Brad's name was not on the prohibited persons list, meaning he could have walked into any gun store on any street, or used any other means of legally purchasing a firearm. These types of mistakes or oversights cannot happen. At some point, Brad was a commercial truck driver, but it's uncertain whether he was still doing that at the time of the shooting, if he was employed elsewhere, or if he was unemployed. Brad was charged with 4 counts of murder, 2 felony counts of attempted murder of a police officer, and 3 counts of attempted murder. Additionally, he was charged with 4 felony enhancements of personal discharge of a firearm causing death, 1 felony enhancement of personal discharge of a firearm causing great bodily injury, 1 felony enhancement of personal use of a firearm, and 1 felony enhancement of premeditation, each of which deemed Brad eligible for the death penalty. He was arraigned in Orange County Superior Court in Santa Ana, where Judge Sharif Pham ordered that the criminal proceeding be suspended pending an evaluation to determine whether Brad was mentally capable of assisting in his own defense. Such a move is not unusual, particularly in this case, because Brad suffered a traumatic brain injury, and as such, his attorneys claimed that on numerous visits to see their client in the hospital, they were not able to communicate with him due to the bullet injury, and, frankly, Brad simply wasn't even able to understand very basic concepts. In September, 2 court-appointed mental health experts qualified Brad as incompetent to stand trial, and unable to participate in his own defense, which was the result of the brain injury. The Orange County prosecutors hired a specialist for a third opinion before making a final decision on how to proceed. Prosecutors indicated that they weren't quite prepared to accept the first 2 professionals' findings, and wanted an expert who specialized in neurology, rather than the psychologist and psychiatrist that initially evaluated Brad. The third expert deemed Brad incompetent too, and it must have been the case because the final ruling was that Brad wasn't fit for trial. But he could possibly be restored to competency, and therefore he was ruled to undergo treatment and the trial was suspended indefinitely. The court, defense, and prosecution will meet periodically to get status updates, and in the meantime, Brad remains housed in a lockdown mental health facility. The Unified Homes shooting was the deadliest in the city of Orange since 1997, when a disgruntled employee at Caltrans armed himself with an assault rifle and murdered 4 workers in the agency's yard. According to the article, DA investigators report details concerns DA Spitzer jeopardized mass shooting case, written by Nick Gerda for the Voice of OC paper, March 14, 2022 edition. At least 3 prosecutors revealed that the Orange County District Attorney, Todd Spitzer, impeded its own case in 2 ways. The claims were that the DA had a conversation with the minor victim, Matthew's father, and he made fallacious statements to an investigator for the DA's office, leaving out important information that must be disclosed to the defense. The link to the article will be linked in the show notes. In essence, the claim is that the DA was coming close to blurring lines and boundaries that you don't ethically cross as a public official. DA Spitzer denied all allegations raised, claiming that his conversation with the victim's father was an unimpeachable one, with a grieving father, and he claimed all other allegations were the product of a former prosecutor who was tangled up in a legal battle with the county and was trying to bolster her position. The investigators' report continued by claiming that Spitzer raised red flags when he told other prosecutors that he spoke with Matthew's father, Rafael Farias, and they briefly discussed an open case against Rafael. The conversation, however short, was not with Rafael's lawyer present, which is a major legal no-no. When DA Spitzer spoke with his colleagues later, he stated, quote, "Based on the information I received from Farias, this did not sound like a good case for our office." Again, speaking with a defendant about their case without their attorney present, and then recommending to the prosecution staff that it was not a good case to pursue, are all serious infractions that very well could rise to the level of misconduct. The senior assistant DA indicated that Spitzer told him, quote, "He, Spitzer, spoke with a witness of a special circumstances homicide without an investigator present, who is also a defendant in one of our open criminal cases, and represented by counsel, without counsel present." After Spitzer was presented with this information, he claimed he needed to be interviewed in order to document his conversation with Farias because the conversation between DA and defendant victim without anyone else there, must be disclosed to the defense attorney. 2 weeks later, Spitzer was again confronted when it came to light that he didn't tell the DA investigator all of the facts about his earlier conversation with Farias. The DA investigation report reads, quote, "Compared with what Spitzer said in the executive meeting, his later interview lacked detail and context and was misleading." Assistant DA Tracy Miller filed a claim alleging that Spitzer placed the entire case about the shooting in jeopardy by speaking with a victim without his attorney. She further proclaimed that Spitzer, quote, "discussed favorable treatment and seeking to withhold the true facts of that contact by making materially false statements when interviewed about it internally." For his part, Spitzer issued a statement which asserted that his actions were completely appropriate and that he did the right thing when he ended the conversation with Farias as soon as he learned that Farias was being prosecuted for a crime unrelated to the shooting. Spitzer continued by saying, quote, "I am a victim advocate, and I talk to victims all the time throughout the course of my duties as a district attorney. This was an innocent and completely understandable interaction with a grieving father who, unbeknownst to me, also happened to be a charged defendant in a separate case. As soon as I was made aware of his pending criminal charges, I terminated the conversation and said I could only talk to his attorney going forward." He further elaborated, saying, quote, "It is abundantly clear from my reading of Investigator Schiffner's report that Miss Miller's characterization of my conduct and how she describes the circumstances is biased, leading, fails to be objective, is agenda-driven, and entirely inappropriate. In a telephone call with Tracy Miller, she testified that, quote, Farias explained to Spitzer why it was okay for him to transfer the alleged victims in the auto theft case into his name, and that he was not guilty. He also mentioned something about a restraining order violation to Spitzer, and said he was not guilty of that crime either. For his part, Spitzer indicated to his fellow prosecutors that, quote, Farias was very emotional during his conversation, and he felt sorry for him. Additionally, several other prosecutors expressed uneasiness about Spitzer allegedly risking other cases by, quote, inserting himself and engaging in improper conduct. Spitzer has denied all claims. While this case fits the FBI definition of a mass shooting, it's much more of an outlier on the spectrum of the shootings we've grown accustomed to reading and hearing about. There doesn't seem to be significant planning or any real mental health or criminal history that may suggest this could happen. Red flags may have been present, but it appears much more difficult to have been predicted, much less prevented. With the delicate balance of mental health reform, education, active shooter training, and common sense gun laws, we may one day realize the dream that there will be no more active shootings. We all have the unique ability to help prevent such a catastrophic event from happening if we keep our eyes and ears open and never hesitate to report when something or someone just doesn't seem right. It is our sincerest wish that there will be no more active or mass shooting stories to tell. We pray that love will prevail over hate.
Too many have died! We should say to ourselves, not one more!
In the meantime, we urge our listeners to stay aware of your surroundings and keep in touch with your loved ones. If you see something, say something. You never know how many lives you'll be saving.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Active Shooter, the podcast. Remember, if you see something, say something. There's no telling how many lives you may be saving. A big thank you to Darren Curtis, who composed some of the songs on our show. You can find him online at www.darrencurtismusic.com. Make sure to check us out on social media. You can find us on Facebook at Active Shooter, the podcast, and on Twitter at Podcast Active. Thank you, and be safe.